Good morning, good afternoon, or good night, and welcome to Command Power, the show where we talk about all things Magic the Gathering with a focus on Commander. And today we're going to be discussing a new batch of Dominaria spoilers. This is the first one that came out when they first revealed the set, so we haven't really had a chance to talk about them yet. We've talked about the Commander ones, but not the ones from the main set. So we're going to do that today. If you would like to see a video of me discussing the Dominaria United Commander cards, please click here. And without further ado, let's get started. So the first card we're going to talk about today is impossible to avoid. It's Liliana of the Veil. What a reprint. Now this card is amazing. It's not the best in Commander, but it's a great card for other formats, so we're really happy to see it reprinted. Not much to say here. It's one of the best Planeswalkers ever printed, and hopefully this will make the price drop for those folks that are trying to pick it up, like me. Next up we have Squee, Dubious Monarch. It's a 2 colorless, 1 red, 2/2. Legendary creature, Goblin Noble. Squee is one of my favorite characters from the lore. Let's see what the abilities do here. He has haste, and whenever he attacks, create a 1/1 red goblin creature token that's tapped and attacking. It's a great start, so it's a little bit like Goblin Rabble Master there. Not quite as good, but that card is absolutely busted. What's up next? You may cast Squee, Dubious Monarch from your graveyard by paying 3 colorless, 1 red, and exiling 4 other cards from your graveyard rather than paying its mana cost. So it basically has escape, it's just not keyworded as such. That's in line with Squee. He usually returns himself from the graveyard to hand, or you can cast him from exile, because in the lore he is unkillable, he can not die basically. This ability is a little bit on the weaker side compared to other versions of Squee, I think. Hard to get too excited about that. The cost is pretty high, so you're going to have to be doing a lot of rummaging in red for this to be decent. It's not bad. In Commander, in any case, you can still play it from the command zone, so you don't really need the alternate cost that much. And the first ability is also not super strong. I mean, just getting 1/1, and Squee's probably going to die because he's a 2/2. Nah, it seems kind of weak. Let's see what's up next. Next is Conor, the Tainted, for 2 colorless, 1 blue, 1 black, and 1 red. He's a 5/5, and at the beginning of your end step, choose one that hasn't been chosen. Draw a card. That's good. Each opponent loses 2 life, and you gain 2 life. That's also good. Conor, the Tainted, deals 3 damage to up to 1 target creature or planeswalker. Still good. Exile Conor, then return it to the battlefield under an opponent's control. Ew, that one's a bit iffy. However, there are plenty of ways around this, to be honest. You could sacrifice him before the 4th trigger happens. You could blink him with Conjurer's Closet or something of the like before the 4th trigger happens, or even before the other triggers happen, so you can reuse them. This seems a little bit slow to me. It's good. I mean, you're always getting good stuff out of it, and as long as you find a way to avoid giving it to your opponent, it's a great card. But it's hard to get too excited about. Again, it's a very slow value engine in Commander, and it's only happening during your end step, so yeah, I don't know. Not my favorite card. Next up, it's Zer Eternal Schema for 1 white, 1 blue, and 1 black. It's a legendary creature, human wizard. It's a 1/4. It has flying. Enchantment creatures you control have Death Touch, Lifelink, and Hexproof. Wow! And then for 1 colorless and 1 white, target non-aura enchantment you control becomes a creature in addition to its other types and has base power and base toughness equal to its mana value. This is sweet. This is a really sweet commander. We've never seen anything like this before. It's going to let you play all of those Theros enchantment creatures that maybe were not quite good enough to see play in other places, because suddenly they all have Death Touch, Lifelink, and Hexproof, which is absolutely awesome. And if you somehow find a way to make him into an enchantment, then you're really golden, because it's going to be very difficult to remove him. Also, the other ability that just turns your regular enchantments into beefy creatures that have those 3 keywords is amazing too. He's also super cheap for only 3 mana. I think this card is an absolute home run, and it's a really cool build around as well, which is important. It's something that we've never seen before on a card. Love it. Next up, it's Soul of Windgrace for 1 colorless, 1 black, 1 red, and 1 green. Whenever Soul of Windgrace enters the battlefield or attacks, you may put a land card from a graveyard onto the battlefield tapped under your control. He's a 5/4. Then he has 3 activated abilities. The first one is 1 green, discard a land card, you gain 3 life. Okay, that's fine. Second one is 1 colorless and 1 red, discard a land card, draw a card. That's a good rummage ability. And the final one is 2 colorless and 1 black, discard a land card, Soul of Windgrace gains indestructible until end of turn, tap it. So he is a very flexible commander, and the fact that he can keep bringing back lands from your graveyard is really sweet whenever he enters the battlefield or attacks. So you're going to be able to reuse those lands that you've previously discarded. You also probably want some sack outlets for your lands so that you can keep getting those triggers in. Because eventually, otherwise, you will run out of lands in the graveyard. You'll probably have them all on the battlefield if the game goes long enough. Just a sweet value commander. I really like it. And I love any deck where Life from the Loam is good, and it would be amazing in this deck. So yeah, Ramanap, Excavator, Life from the Loam, Crucible of Worlds, all that nonsense will be great in this deck. Wrath, Weatherlight, Stalwart. He is for 1 white and 1 blue. A legendary creature, human wizard, 1/3. Whenever you cast an instant or sorcery spell, you may tap 2 untapped creatures you control. If you do, draw a card. So it's kind of like Conspire, except instead of copying the spell, you're going to be able to draw a card. That's pretty nice in token strategies. And then for 3 colorless and 2 white, you get creatures you control get +1/+1 and gain vigilance until end of turn. So obviously you want to put this in a token strategy. Preferably a token strategy where you're making the tokens with instants or sorceries rather than creatures, because you want to be able to then tap the tokens that you're making to draw the extra card. It seems really good to me. Once it gets going, it's going to be quite difficult to stop. It seems like it could get out of hand very quickly and keep replacing itself every time you play a spell, so you're hardly ever going to run out of gas. The Raven Man. For 1 colorless and 1 black, we get a legendary creature, human wizard, 2/1. Now, I've been really excited about the Raven Man since he first showed up in the lore years ago, and we've recently finally got the reveal about who the Raven Man is. I will not tell you, but you can go look it up, and let's see if the card lives up to that. At the beginning of each end step, if a player discarded a card this turn, create a 1/1 black bird creature token with flying, and this creature can't block. Okay, it's a bit awkward that it has this creature can't block, because if you want a slower kind of deck where you're getting people to discard, you kind of want your tokens to be able to stem the damage a little bit. Each opponent discards a card, activate only as a sorcery, so that's 3 colorless and 1 black to activate. You have to tap him. The fact that it's only as a sorcery is kind of awkward because he says at the beginning of each end step. So you want to be getting one on each opponent's turn if possible to get the maximum value out of this, especially since they can't block. Just getting one of them during your turn is not really going to do that much. So you're going to have to find ways to get people to discard at instant speed. That is not super common in Magic these days. There's a few ways to do it, but it's going to require some serious build around, I feel, and maybe you need something to give all your spells flash to make it a little bit easier, such as Vidalcan Orrery or something along those lines. Next we have Joyra, Ageless Innovator. She is 1 blue, 1 red, for a 2/3 legendary human artificer, and she has tap, put 2 ingenuity counters on Joyra, Ageless Innovator. Then you may put an artifact card with mana value X or less from your hand onto the battlefield, where X is the number of ingenuity counters on Joyra. This is really strong. This is like super silly. I mean, 2 mana, she comes down really early, and 3 toughness makes it not that easy to kill, even in Commander. And she's just gonna get out of control so fast. You're gonna be dropping a mana rock the first time you do this, so you're probably gonna be getting like a nice little signet or something, just some ramp, presumably. But where it gets really silly is if you add in Proliferate, or if you add in ways to untap her, and there's quite a few of those that are artifacts. I was thinking about something like Umbral Mantle, where you can just pay 3 and get to do the whole thing again, which is really disgusting. Puppet Strings would be good, even stuff like that. And then Throne of Geth strikes me like it would be really sweet, because you could just sacrifice some of the maybe less good artifacts that you're playing to just proliferate and put more counters on her. This is going to be really strong. There's probably a lot of broken stuff that can be done with this. And I mean, I love Joyra. It's one of my favorite characters in the game, so super excited about this one. Next up we have Defiler of Dreams. For 3 colorless and 2 blue pips, we have a creature, Phyrexian Sphinx. It's a 4/3. It has flying, and as an additional cost to cast blue permanent spells, you may pay 2 life. Those spells cost blue less to cast if you paid life this way. This effect reduces only the amount of blue mana you pay. And it also has, whenever you cast a blue permanent spell, draw a card. Okay, so that first ability is a really convoluted way to say, tell me your Phyrexian mana without telling me your Phyrexian mana. Basically, they're trying to fix the mechanic and not make it as broken, but it just ends up so clunky and wordy because of that. It can only reduce 1 pip in each card, and it can only be used on permanent cards, so it seems a lot safer. This card's still really good. I mean, don't get me wrong. Casting any blue permanent spell and drawing a card is fantastic. This is gonna go straight in my Alrund, like, Blue Stompy deck. This is absolutely amazing in there. It's just weird that they decided to template it like this. I guess they were just too scared to properly bring back Phyrexian mana, which is very understandable because that mechanic's broken. Sheoldred, the Apocalypse. For 2 colorless and 2 black, we have a legendary creature, Phyrexian Prater, a 4/5 death touch. Whenever you draw a card, you gain 2 life. Whenever an opponent draws a card, they lose 2 life. Gix failed. I shall not. This is sweet. I mean, this is a really... I think this is much better than people are currently giving it credit for. Certainly much better than that fake one that was spoiled earlier, which was just basically a less good Tergrid. This is super, super good, and it lends itself to a new kind of black build as well, which I like. So you're basically going to be playing all these artifacts that draw you cards like Howling Mine or Fond of Mythos. They draw each player cards basically at the beginning of each turn, extra cards. So this is going to end up adding up really quick. You're going to gain a lot of life, and most importantly, all of your opponents are going to take a lot of life. This is pretty cheap to come down as well. It doesn't even cost that much. There's few cards outside of artifacts that that cause people to wheel in black. I think there's one, I can't remember the name right now, but yeah, there's like a couple that I can think of off the top of my head. But it just feels like it's going to be a new kind of black build, and I'm always up for that. And also, she's just so cool. Next one is Archangel of Wrath. For 2 colorless and 2 white pips, we have a creature, Angel. It's a 3/4 with flying and lifelink. When Archangel of Wrath enters the battlefield, if it was kicked, it deals 2 damage to any target. And when Archangel of Wrath enters the battlefield, if it was kicked twice, it deals 2 damage to any target. And it has kicker for black and for red. So this is pretty good. You could basically just pay it for 6 and get to deal 4 damage divided in any way you want, basically 2 and 2 or 4 to 1 target. Because it has lifelink, you're going to gain 4 life from that as well. And you also have the flexibility of just playing it for 4 mana 3/4 with flying and lifelink, which is pretty decent, or playing it for 5 as well if you want to. Obviously it's more of a constructed card than an EDH card, so we're going to move on, but it's an interesting card nonetheless. The Phasing of gelfia for 2 colorless and 2 blue. And it has Read Ahead, which is a new ability on sagas that lets you skip some of the chapters. You can just start at any chapter you want and then go on from there. So I'm not sure how I feel about that. I kind of like the fact that sagas were kind of slow, inevitable kind of things that you build up to. I'm not super fond of the fact that you can now just play them. I get that it's stronger, than it gives you more flexibility, but it just kind of takes away from what made the cards special, in my opinion. But maybe that's just me. And it has chapters 1 and 2. Another target non-land permanent phases out. It can't phase in for as long as you control the Phasing of gelfia, and destroy all creatures. For each creature destroyed this way, its controller creates a 2/2 black Phyrexian creature token. I do think that the design on this one is really good, because it creates good tension between wanting to play it early but giving your opponent some time to respond, and just playing it with the 3rd chapter and destroying everything. Although again, it's annoying that blue gets these effects, because this should not be a blue effect, and Wizards have actually said that this is one of the last cards that they're gonna use this kind of destroy all creatures for on blue, because it just feels like it should be white or black. It just doesn't seem very blue to me, and blue already has so many good ways to answer permanents, including mass bounce, as well as counterspells to answer any card, so I don't think it really needs this kind of stuff. Ajani, Sleeper Agent. For 1 colorless, 1 green, 1 Phyrexian green-white, and 1 white. It's a legendary planeswalker, Ajani, which has 4 stunning loyalty. He is completed, which means, well, you know, one of those pips can be paid with 2 life, like Phyrexian mana, and if you do, it comes in with 2 fewer loyalty counters. Then he has Reveal the top card of your library. If it's a creature or planeswalker card, put it into your hand. Otherwise, you may put it at the bottom of your library. That's fine, but it's not protection, so... Distribute 3 +1/+1 counters among up to 3 target creatures. They gain vigilance until end of turn, and that costs -3 to activate. This could be good because you can make one guy bigger, but again, you need to have something on the board to protect him already. You could also spread it out and make 3 creatures bigger, but -3 is a pretty big ask, I feel, for that. It just doesn't seem that good of an ability to cost that much. And then -6 is you get an emblem with whenever you cast a creature or planeswalker spell, target opponent gets 2 poison counters. Okay, so there's quite a few things I want to say about this card. First of all, I don't think it feels very Phyrexian other than the tacked on poison counter ultimate. There's nothing really about this card that says it's a Phyrexian. I don't understand why it's only green-white either. It just doesn't scream Phyrexian to me. Most of the abilities still feel very regular ajani, so it's kind of boring in that sense. It has no protection, really, which means it's going to be difficult for it to survive. And if you complete it, you can only really use the +1 because you can't even use the -3. So it's not very flexible. So all of this really adds up to make what I feel is a very win-more card. It's a card that's great when you're ahead and the opponents have no way to pressure you, but in most kind of other circumstances, you're going to be playing catch-up. Obviously, you can play it on turn 4, and if you have a creature, make your creature bigger, and then you can attack with it and kind of hope to defend ajani, but then you've just got a 1 loyalty planeswalker left on the board, and it's going to take a long time to tick back up. Don't know, just feels a bit underwhelming for me. We have Braids, a Risen Nightmare next, which is 1 colorless and 2 black. It's a legendary creature, Nightmare, for a 3/3. At the beginning of your end step, you may sacrifice an artifact, creature, enchantment, land, or planeswalker. If you do, each opponent may sacrifice a permanent that shares a card type with it. For each opponent who doesn't, that player loses 2 life and you draw a card. This is really sweet. I mean, I've always liked Braids as the character. I even had a blue Braids deck before, obviously not a black one because it's banned in Commander. But I think the art is really sweet on this, especially the alternate art is amazing. And the ability is kind of cool too. It's a bit stacksy, but it's kind of fair in a way, and it gives the opponent a choice. They're not forced, like with the Braids, to sacrifice a land on turn 2 or whatever, which is just not fun. They can also just opt out of it, but in that case they lose 2 life and you draw a card, which is kinda good. So this is just gonna be a cool card advantage engine for you. You're always gonna get good value out of it. And it just seems really fun to me. It just seems like another unique, new kind of build-around effect that we haven't really seen before. So I'm loving most of these commanders. Next up we have the World Spell, which is 5 colorless and 2 green. Don't really like the art on this very much. It's a saga, so you again get to skip ahead if you want to. In chapters 1 and 2, you look at the top 7 cards of your library and you may reveal a non-saga permanent card from among them and put it into your hand. Put the rest on the bottom of your library in a random order. So you get to pick up 2 permanents, some card advantage. For 7 mana, that's pretty hefty, but you do get to dig pretty deep each time, so that's nice. And then in chapter 3, you get to put 2 non-saga permanent cards from your hand onto the battlefield. So the idea, I suppose, if you cast it slowly, is to get 2 things, search for them, and then you just get to put them into play. It's very slow to do that, and people are probably going to blow it up before chapter 3, because chapter 3 is the one that really matters. It's the one where you're saving a ton of mana and where you're going to be able to just get most of the value from the card. But if you read ahead and just skip to chapter 3, this is not really as good as something like Tooth and Nail. It's like half of a Tooth and Nail, which I guess is fine because it's about the same cost. But I guess as redundancy, it's quite good. I feel like it's a little bit on the weaker side from the cards we've seen so far, but still could be useful. Next we have Impede Momentum, and it's 1 colorless and 1 blue. It's a sorcery, tap target creature and put 3 stun counters on it and scry 1. Now stun counters are a new kind of counter that's coming in, and they just say if you have a creature with a stun counter on it and it would untap, instead you just remove a stun counter from it. This is better than old cards that said they don't untap until the opponent's next untap step, etc. Because with those cards, you could untap them with other means and then they would just be untapped. But with this, you can't. You have to remove all the counters first. This puts 3 counters on. So that's like 3 or 4 turns with the creature completely locked down. This is actually going to be really back-breaking in Limited. This is a really good Limited card. And as a common, it's going to make the format pretty aggro, I feel. It might even be good in certain commander decks. If you've got decks where you're a bit spell slingery and you've got like little creatures trying to attack, this can keep big blockers tapped down for a few turns, and the scry is kind of useful. I quite like this new mechanic, and this card seems very strong. Next up we have Herd Migration for 6 colorless and 1 green. It has Domain, create a 3/3 green beast creature token for each basic land type amongst land you control. So basically you need to have Domain for at least 4 for this to kind of be worth it. If you have Domain for 3, it's 7 mana for 9/9 in stats over 3 creatures. That's not really going to cut it these days because they're kind of vanilla. But if you have 12/12 or 15/15, I think it starts to get quite good, especially when you add the second part of the card, which lets you discard it to search your library for a basic land card, reveal it, and put it into your hand, and then shuffle. You gain 3 life. So it lets you work towards your domain, and if you're stuck on mana, it lets you search for the card. And if you're stuck on colors, it helps you search for some of those colors that you might be missing. Without the second part of the card, I don't think this would really be in consideration, but with that second part, the flexibility means that it's actually, I think, a decent card. Next up, we have Sphinx of Clear Skies, which is 3 colorless and 2 blue for a creature Sphinx, a 5/5 flying, ward 2. Domain, whenever Sphinx of Clear Skies deals combat damage to a player, reveal the top X cards of your library, where X is the number of basic land types amongst lands you control. An opponent separates those into 2 piles, put 1 pile into your hand and the other into your graveyard. So basically it does a kind of fact or fiction effect based on how much domain you have. So again, you want to have at least 4 or 5. If you're on 3, it's going to be iffy, but if you have 4 or 5, you're going to get at least 2 or 3 cards out of this every time it connects. So it's pretty sweet. The ward 2 also makes it a little bit difficult to kill, a little bit harder than it might be otherwise. So I think this is a pretty sweet card. Next up we have Nemata, Primeval Guardian for 2 colorless, 1 black and 1 green. We have a legendary creature, Tree Folk. It has reach. It's a 3/4. If a creature an opponent controls would die, exile it instead. When you do, create a 1/1 green sapling token. And for green, we have Sacrifice a Sapling. Nemata, Primeval Guardian gets +2/+2 until end of turn. And for 1 colorless and a black, we have Sacrifice 2 Saplings, draw a card. So it's kind of like a Sapling commander. It can make itself a little bit bigger, which is probably not super relevant most of the time. And it also comes in with a nice little bit of graveyard hate, which is nice. They've been putting a lot of graveyard hate on stuff these days. This one is very incidental, but you're also getting a 1/1 each time it does it, so it's nice. This could be great in a Sapling deck. The fact that you can sacrifice 2 of them to draw a card is pretty good. I think it's a good commander. Doesn't make me super excited, but I can see how lots of people might enjoy this. Next up we have Micromancer. It's 3 colorless and 1 blue for a 3/3. When Micromancer enters the battlefield, you may search your library for an instant or sorcery card with mana value 1. Reveal it, put it into your hand, then shuffle. It's basically Trinket Mage, but for instants and sorceries. That seems really good to me. I can see why it would cost 1 more, but the stats decent too. It's a 3/3, which is not irrelevant. And just being able to search for Ponder, being able to search for Rapid Hybridization and Pongify, which are removal spells, being able to search for counter spells, so stuff like An Offer You Can't Refuse or Swan Song, that's just in blue. You could also go into white, get Swords to Plowshares or Path to Exile or all sorts of things in other colors. This is really flexible, and the fact that you can blink it and just keep getting the effect over and over seems really good. I think this is going to be a staple card in a few years. And finally we have Astor, Bearer of Blades. For 2 colorless, 1 red and 1 white, we have a legendary creature, Human Warrior, 4/4. When Astor, Bearer of Blades enters the battlefield, look at the top 7 cards of your library. You may reveal an equipment or vehicle card from among them and put it into your hand. Put the rest on the bottom of your library in a random order. Equipment you control have Equip 1. Vehicles you control have Crew 1. Boring! Just more Boros equipment and vehicle commanders. Who cares at this point? There's just so many of these. It really feels like they're kind of lazy with Boros design. And it's a pity because I think a lot of the other commanders we're seeing in other colors have been completely unique and out of the box. But then you just have a Boros commander and it's equipment and vehicles. Always the same thing. I don't know. Hopefully they can get out of this dynamic at some point because I like Boros. So that's all for this video today. If you have any thoughts, please leave a comment in the comment section below. And if you enjoyed this video, don't forget to click like and or subscribe. That really helps the channel and I would really appreciate it. Until next time, take care.